In a luxury Manhattan cafe, a quietly determined woman was about to orchestrate the downfall of her former boss. What started as an innocent coffee meeting took a shocking turn when she revealed her plan to destroy the man who had humiliated her. Jemima Dubois wasn't your typical victim. For 2 years, she had endured workplace discrimination while secretly managing their biggest client through her childhood friend who owned a luxury fashion empire. When Philippe Moreau unleashed his cruelty in French, assuming she couldn't understand, he had no idea he was handing her the perfect weapon for revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting their harsh glare across the Sterling and Associates conference room. Jemima Dubois sat perfectly still in her chair, hands folded in her lap, watching Philippe Moreau pace behind the mahogany table like a caged predator. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor with each measured step, a sound that had come to represent everything she'd learned to endure over the past 2 years. The Hartwell presentation was a disaster, Philippe announced to the assembled creative team, his accent thick with Parisian superiority. Absolute amateur work. No sophistication, no understanding of what luxury clients expect. Jemima's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. She had written every word of that presentation, had crafted each slide with meticulous attention to the client's aesthetic preferences, their brand identity, their target demographic. The presentation that Philippe had delivered, with minimal changes and zero acknowledgement of her contribution, had secured a 6-figure contract renewal. But here he stood, rewriting history with the casual cruelty she'd come to recognize as his signature. Tyler Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his seat 2 chairs down from her. She could feel his concern radiating across the space between them, the way his dark eyes kept flicking in her direction. Tyler understood the dynamics of this room better than most. As the second-generation Mexican-American who'd fought his way up from community college to MBA from Columbia, he recognized the subtle warfare of workplace discrimination, but understanding it and confronting it were different things entirely. "We cannot afford this kind of mediocrity," Philippe continued, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "Not when we're competing with firms that understand European sensibilities, that understand what it means to think globally." Lauren Hayes, the senior account executive, stared down at her notes with the focused intensity of someone trying to become invisible. At 38, she'd navigated Sterling and Associates' treacherous waters long enough to know when storms were coming. Her manicured fingers gripped her Mont Blanc pen like a lifeline. Philippe's pacing stopped abruptly. His pale blue eyes, cold as winter morning, fixed on Jemima with predatory satisfaction. She felt the familiar chill that preceded his worst moments, the look that meant he decided to make an example of someone, and today, that someone was her. "Miss Dubois," he said, her surname dripping with disdain, "since you were responsible for the initial draft of this catastrophe, perhaps you could explain to the team what you were thinking." The room fell silent except for the relentless buzz of the fluorescents. She raised her eyes to meet his, her expression carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago not to give him the satisfaction of a reaction, not to let him see the way his words hit their mark with surgical precision. "I followed the creative brief as outlined," she said quietly, her voice steady. "The client approved the concepts at each stage of development." Philippe's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Ah, yes, the client approved. Tell me, Miss Dubois, do you think approval means success? Do you think meeting minimum expectations is something to celebrate?" She could feel Tyler's tension escalating beside her. Lauren's pen had stopped moving entirely. The other team members, junior designers and copywriters who'd learned to keep their heads down during Philippe's performances, stared at their laptops with desperate focus. The campaign exceeded the client's engagement metrics by 37%, Jemima replied evenly. Revenue increased by enough,
Philippe's voice cracked like a whip. I don't want to hear statistics. I want to understand how someone with your educational background could produce work so fundamentally lacking in sophistication. The words hung in the air like smoke. She felt them settle around her, each syllable calculated to diminish, to reduce, to remind everyone in the room of their place in Philippe's carefully constructed hierarchy. She thought of her grandmother, Grandmère Elise, who had crossed an ocean with nothing but stubborn pride and 3 words of English, who had built a life from fragments, who had taught Jemima that strength often meant knowing when to bend without breaking. Philippe moved closer, his shadow falling across her notepad, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped to a theatrical whisper that somehow managed to fill the entire room. Vous êtes une nullité absolue, he said, the French rolling off his tongue with venomous elegance. Un employé sans valeur qui ne comprend rien à l'art de la publicité sophistiquée. Je me demande comment vous avez réussi à tromper nos recruteurs.
Around the table, her colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. They didn't need translation to understand the tone, the intent, the casual cruelty of using a language they couldn't comprehend to deliver what was clearly a devastating assault. Philippe straightened, his smile cold with satisfaction. In fact, I think it's time we addressed this situation properly. Miss Dubois, your position here has become, how do you say, redundant. You are terminated, effective, immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Jemima sat perfectly still, her face betraying nothing of the storm raging inside her chest. She understood every word he'd spoken. Every insult, every calculated humiliation, the French that he'd wielded like a weapon, assuming she was too simple, too American, too beneath him to comprehend his elegant cruelty. If only he knew that Grandmère Elise had raised her bilingual, that her summers in Lyon had been spent not just visiting family, but absorbing the language with the fluency of someone who belonged to 2 worlds. That his assumption of her ignorance was perhaps the most costly mistake of his professional life. But she gave him nothing. No reaction, no plea, no protestation of innocence or competence. She simply nodded once, a small, dignified gesture that somehow made Philippe's victory feel hollow. "I'll need to collect my personal belongings," she said quietly, her voice unchanged. "Of course." Philippe's smile widened. "Take your time." Tyler started to stand, his chair scraping against the floor. "Philippe! This is—" "Mr. Rodriguez," Philippe's voice cut through Tyler's protest like a blade. "Unless you'd like to discuss your own performance review, I suggest you focus on your remaining responsibilities." Tyler's jaw clenched, but he settled back into his chair. The message was clear. Challenge me, and you'll follow her out the door. Jemima rose from her chair with the same careful composure she'd maintained throughout the meeting. She gathered her notepad, her pen, the portfolio she'd brought with presentation materials that would never be needed. Each movement was deliberate, dignified, refusing to be hurried by Philippe's obvious desire to watch her crumble. As she reached the conference room door, Philippe called out one final humiliation. "Et n'oubliez pas de rendre votre badge de sécurité en sortant. And don't forget to return your security badge on your way out." Jemima paused with her hand on the door handle. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine turning around, responding in perfect French, watching his face crumble as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. But that moment would come. Just not today. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like descending through layers of her former life. With each ding of the floors passing, Jemima felt pieces of who she'd been at Sterling & Associates falling away. The quiet strategist who'd absorbed insults without comment, the brilliant mind who'd let others take credit for her work, the woman who'd made herself smaller to fit into Philippe's narrow vision of what belonged in his sophisticated world. The elevator was empty except for her, and finally, she allowed her mask to slip.
Her hands trembled as she reached for the emergency stop button, bringing the car to a halt between floors. In the artificial silence, she pressed her back against the cool metal wall and let herself feel everything she'd held back. Salaud. Tu ne sais pas ce que tu viens de déclencher. Bastard, you have no idea what you just unleashed. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel doors, composed, professional, unremarkable, but behind her dark eyes, something had shifted. The quiet strategist was gone. In her place stood someone Philippe Moreau had never bothered to truly see, a woman who understood exactly how to play his game, because she'd been learning the rules in 2 languages her entire life. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her blazer, and pressed the button to resume her descent. When the doors opened onto the marble lobby of Sterling & Associates, she walked out with the same measured pace she'd maintained upstairs. But her mind was already racing ahead, calculating angles and possibilities, remembering conversations and connections that Philippe had never thought to investigate. He'd made his move, played what he thought was his strongest card. Now it was her turn. And unlike Philippe, she wouldn't underestimate her opponent. She knew exactly what he was capable of because she'd been watching, listening, and learning for 2 long years. The security guard took her badge with professional sympathy. The revolving door deposited her onto Fifth Avenue, where the afternoon sun felt warmer than the artificial light she'd left behind. Jemima pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't behauled in months, Brittany Coleman, CEO of Maison Celeste. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. Philippe's casual cruelty would finally meet its match. But first, she needed to be certain she was making this choice for the right reasons. As she walked away from Sterling & Associates for the last time, Jemima's mind was already 3 moves ahead, and for the first time in 2 years, she was smiling. 24 hours after walking out of Sterling & Associates, Jemima sat across from Brittany Coleman in Le Bernardin's private dining room, watching her childhood friend's manicured fingers tighten around a crystal wine glass. The lunch had started as their usual monthly catch-up, 2 successful women sharing updates over perfectly plated cuisine. Now it felt like a war council. He said what? Brittany's voice carried the refined edge that made fashion executives across 3 continents take notice. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a chignon.
That would have looked severe on anyone else, but on Brittany, it emphasized the sharp intelligence in her green eyes. Every word, Jemima replied quietly, cutting into her Dover soul with surgical precision. In French, he assumed I wouldn't understand. Brittany set down her glass with deliberate care. That pompous ass has no idea what he just did, does he? They'd known each other since age 7, when Jemima's grandmother had first moved to their suburban Connecticut neighborhood. Brittany's father, a career diplomat, had been preparing for his posting to Lyon. The 2 girls had bonded over shared French lessons and dreams bigger than their small town could contain. 15 million, Brittany said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. That's what Sterling & Associates makes annually from Maison Celeste. $15 million that Philippe thinks he earned through his sophisticated European sensibilities. Jemima's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She'd known the contract was substantial, but seeing the number laid bare made something cold settle in her stomach. Brittany, I didn't call you to what? To ask for help? To suggest I might reconsider doing business with a firm that employs bigots who humiliate my oldest friend? Brittany leaned forward, her voice carrying the steel that had built her fashion empire. Jemima, every campaign Sterling has produced for us in the past 2 years, every single one that Philippe takes credit for, came from your mind. Your understanding of luxury marketing, your cultural insights. The truth hung between them like expensive perfume. Jemima had been the invisible architect behind Maison Celeste's most successful advertising campaigns, feeding ideas to Philippe, who presented them as his sophisticated vision.
The Riviera collection launch, the Paris Fashion Week campaign, the holiday luxury series that increased our North American sales by 40%. All you. Jemima set down her fork, her appetite disappearing. Using our friendship to destroy someone's career? Someone who just destroyed yours? Jemima's laugh was sharp. Jemima, this isn't about friendship. This is about competence, about justice, about Philippe finally facing consequences for assuming he's untouchable. Outside the restaurant's windows, Manhattan pulsed with afternoon energy. Somewhere in that maze of glass and ambition, Philippe was probably celebrating his performance from yesterday, secure in his belief that he'd eliminated a problem. "What are you suggesting?" Jemima asked, though part of her already knew. Brittany smiled, and it was the same expression she'd worn at age 12 when planning elaborate revenge on playground bullies. "I'm suggesting Philippe learn what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding you for 2 years." The coffee shop 3 blocks from Sterling and Associates buzzed with the nervous energy of Midtown Manhattan. Jemima chose a corner table where she could observe without being seen, her laptop open to project the image of someone simply working. When Tyler Rodriguez walked through the door 15 minutes later, his shoulders carried the tension of someone who'd spent 2 days watching workplace injustice unfold. "You look like hell," she said softly, as he slid into the opposite chair. Tyler's laugh was hollow. "Feel like it, too." He ran a hand through his dark hair, the same gesture she'd seen him make countless times during Philippe's meetings. "The office has been a disaster since Tuesday. Philippe's been impossible, even worse than usual." "How so?" Jemima sipped her cappuccino, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "He's paranoid, snapping at everyone, questioning every decision, micromanaging campaigns he never cared about before." Tyler leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Jemima, what he did to you, it wasn't the first time. I've been documenting things." She felt something shift inside her chest. What kind of things? Tyler pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like detailed notes. Comments about Maria's accent during client calls, questions about David's cultural fit when he proposed the Korean beauty brand campaign, and Lauren. He paused, glancing around the coffee shop. Laurent told him she was overstepping when she suggested the feminist angle for the athletic wear account. Each example hit Jemima like a small electric shock. She'd known Philippe was cruel, but she'd assumed his discrimination was personal, aimed specifically at her. The reality was more systemic, more calculated. "Why haven't you reported this?" Tyler's expression darkened. "To who? Robert Anderson thinks Philippe walks on water. The Maison Celeste account made Philippe untouchable." He paused, studying her face. "At least it did until Tuesday." "What do you mean?" "The Hartwell presentation, the one Philippe called a disaster, the client loved it, signed a renewal contract yesterday morning. But Philippe's acting like the sky is falling. He's desperate about something." Jemima's pulse quickened. Desperate how? "He's been on the phone constantly with Maison Celeste, trying to schedule meetings, something about campaign revisions that nobody requested. And he's been asking strange questions about the account history. Who handled the initial pitch? Who maintains client relations?" Tyler's eyes narrowed. "Jemima, does Philippe know about your connection to Brittany Coleman?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Jemima felt the weight of her next words, understanding that everything depended on how much she revealed.
"Tyler," she said quietly, "what would you do if you discovered someone had been taking credit for your work for 2 years?" His hand found hers across the small table. "I'd want them to face consequences, even if those consequences affected innocent people at the firm." Tyler's grip tightened. "The only innocent people at Sterling and Associates are the ones Philippe's been victimizing. Maybe it's time someone fought back." Outside the coffee shop windows, the city pulsed with endless possibility. Jemima's apartment overlooked Central Park, a sanctuary of cream-colored walls and carefully curated art that reflected none of the storm brewing in her mind. She sat cross-legged on her grandmother's Persian rug, laptop balanced on the coffee table that had once belonged to Grand-Mère Elise, surrounded by legal pads covered in methodical notes.
The apartment still carried traces of her grandmother's presence. The faint scent of lavender sachets, the crystal perfume bottles on the vanity, the framed photograph of a young woman standing defiantly outside a Lyon café in 1952. Grandmère had taught her that patience was a weapon sharper than rage, that true victory came from understanding your opponent better than they understood themselves. Her phone buzzed against the glass table. Brittany's name appeared on the screen. "Tell me you've decided," Brittany said without preamble. Jemima stared at the timeline she had created, each phase of Philippe's downfall mapped with the precision of a military campaign. "I need Lauren Hayes," she said. "The account executive? Why?" "She's been documenting Felipe's behavior too, and she understands the legal implications better than anyone." Jemima traced a finger along her notes. "If we're going to do this, it can't just be about revenge. It has to be about creating real change." "And Felipe?" Jemima closed her eyes, remembering the satisfied smile on his face as he had humiliated her in French. "Felipe gets exactly what he's earned, but on our terms, our timeline. I can pull the Massillon Celeste contract Monday morning. One phone call." "No." Jemima's voice carried new authority. "That's too simple, too clean. Felipe needs to understand that his assumptions about me, about language, about who deserves respect, those assumptions have consequences." She stood, moving to the window where Manhattan glittered in the early evening light. Somewhere in that maze of ambition, Felipe was probably enjoying dinner at his exclusive Upper East Side restaurant, secure in his belief that Tuesday's performance had solved his problems. The Riviera campaign presentation? When is it scheduled? Next Friday. Why? Because that's when Felipe discovers that his most sophisticated marketing strategies came from the woman he called worthless, in perfect French. Brittany's laugh was sharp with anticipation. "You're going to reveal your fluency during the presentation?" "I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to demonstrate exactly who's been driving Massillon Celeste's success for 2 years, and I'm going to do it in front of Robert Anderson, the client team, and anyone else who needs to understand what competence actually looks like." "And Felipe tries to stop you?" Jemima touched the photograph of her grandmother, remembering the stories of a woman who had rebuilt her life after losing everything. The city lights reflected off her laptop screen where she had typed a single line at the bottom of her plan. Phase 1, recruitment. Tomorrow, she would approach Lauren Hayes. The Women in Marketing networking event occupied the top floor of the Chrysler Building, its Art Deco elegance providing a sophisticated backdrop for Manhattan's most influential advertising professionals. Jemima positioned herself near the champagne station, watching Lauren Hayes navigate the crowd with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent 15 years climbing corporate ladders in designer heels. Lauren looked exhausted beneath her perfectly applied makeup, the kind of exhaustion that came from constantly calculating political angles, from knowing too much and saying too little. "Jemima?" Lauren's surprise seemed genuine as she approached the bar. I'm sorry about what happened." "Thank you." Jemima accepted a glass of champagne from the bartender. "How are things at Sterling since Tuesday?" Lauren's laugh held no humor. "Tense. Felipe has been—" She paused, glancing around the crowded room. "Difficult." "More than usual?" "He questioned my judgment on the Morrison account yesterday, asked if I was culturally equipped to understand their target demographic." Lauren's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They're a Midwestern insurance company, Jemima. I've lived in Ohio my entire life before moving to New York." The words hit exactly as Jemima had expected. She'd spent 3 days researching Lauren's background, understanding her vulnerabilities, her ambitions, her careful navigation of office politics. Lauren Hayes was brilliant, methodical, and tired of being overlooked because she wasn't part of Felipe's inner circle of European sophistication.
That must have been frustrating, Jemima said carefully. It was. Lauren studied her champagne glass. The Morrison presentation was flawless, I know it was. But Philippe acted like I'd embarrassed the firm. She looked up, meeting Jemima's eyes. The same way he acted about your Hartwell presentation, even though it secured the renewal. Jemima felt the opening she'd been waiting for. "Lauren,
Can I ask you something? Off the record. Lauren nodded, her expression weary but curious. How many of Philippe's sophisticated strategies have you seen him develop from scratch? The question hung between them like smoke. Jemima's eyes narrowed, her lawyer's mind clearly processing the implications. What do you mean? I mean, in 2 years of working under Philippe, have you ever watched him create a campaign concept from the ground up? Or does he primarily refine ideas that come from other sources? Lauren was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone finally acknowledging a truth she'd been avoiding. The Maison Celeste campaigns, the cultural insights, the French market positioning, I always wondered how Philippe developed such nuanced understanding of luxury consumer psychology. And now? Now I'm wondering if Philippe developed anything at all. Lauren's champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. Jemima, are you telling me that I'm telling you that Philippe's assumptions about people, about their capabilities, their backgrounds, their worth, might be more costly than he realizes. Jemima leaned closer. And I'm asking if you think Sterling & Associates deserves to know the truth about where their most successful campaigns actually originate. She stared at her for several heartbeats. Around them, the networking event continued its elegant dance of ambition and connection, but their conversation had carved out a bubble of dangerous possibility. What would you need from me? Lauren asked finally. Documentation, testimony, and courage. Jemima's voice carried the quiet authority she'd been developing since Tuesday. Philippe thinks he's untouchable because of the Maison Celeste account. It's time he learned how precarious that protection really is. Lauren finished her champagne in one deliberate swallow. When do we start? Philippe Moreau straightened his Hermes tie as his assistant announced Brittany Coleman's unscheduled arrival. Through his corner office windows, Manhattan stretched out like a conquered territory, and he felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with commanding the 32nd floor of Sterling & Associates. The Maison Celeste CEO's unexpected visit could only mean one thing. She'd finally recognized his sophisticated vision and wanted to discuss expanding their partnership. "Miss Coleman," he said, rising from his leather chair with practiced charm. "What a pleasant surprise. Though I must say, your timing is perfect. I've been developing some revolutionary concepts for your spring campaign." Brittany entered with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to boardrooms where millions were won or lost with a gesture. Her tailored Chanel suit was the color of winter fog, and her smile held all the warmth of December morning. She settled into the chair opposite his desk without waiting for an invitation. "Actually, Philippe, I'm here about concerns with our current campaign direction." The word concerns hit Philippe like cold water. He'd spent 3 days since firing Jemima in a state of barely controlled anxiety, making frantic calls to Maison Celeste that had gone unanswered. Now Brittany sat before him with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Concerns?" He forced his voice to remain steady. "The metrics have been excellent. The client response overwhelmingly positive. The Riviera collection launch. Tell me about your cultural positioning strategy." Philippe felt his mouth go dry. The Riviera campaign had been Jemima's masterpiece, a sophisticated blend of French luxury heritage with American accessibility that had increased sales by 40%. He'd presented it as his own vision. But the nuanced understanding of French coastal culture, the subtle linguistic choices in the copy, the way it captured the essence of Riviera sophistication, all of it had flowed from Jemima's mind. "The cultural positioning," he repeated, buying time. "Well, naturally, my European background provided unique insights into the luxury market psychology. Specifically," Brittany's green eyes were sharp as cut glass, "because I'm concerned about several elements that seem disconnected from authentic French luxury positioning." Philippe's hands began to perspire. "I'm not sure what you mean by disconnected. The L'Art de Vivre in the summer collection. Beautiful phrase, But the accompanying imagery suggests someone who understands Riviera culture from an insider's perspective, someone who knows that true French luxury isn't about ostentation. It's about understated elegance that comes from deep cultural knowledge. Every word was a trap Philippe could feel closing around him. The campaign's success had depended on cultural insights he didn't possess, market psychology he couldn't replicate, and linguistic nuances that required native-level understanding. "Of course," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "My family's summers in Cannes provided extensive exposure to authentic Riviera culture."
Brittany's smile turned predatory. "Really? Because I spent last weekend in Cannes with the Dubois family, old friends from Lyon. They mentioned their granddaughter had developed quite sophisticated insights into luxury marketing. Small world, isn't it?" The name hit Philippe like a physical blow. Dubois. Jemima Dubois, the worthless employee he terminated in French 3 days ago. The woman whose cultural background he'd never bothered to investigate. "I think," Brittany continued, rising from her chair with lethal grace, "we need to schedule a comprehensive review of our campaign strategies. Friday afternoon would be perfect. I'll want to see your team present their process, from concept development through cultural authentication." Philippe's throat felt like sandpaper. "Friday? That's rather short notice for..." "For what, Philippe? For demonstrating the sophisticated European insights that justify our $15 million annual investment?" Brittany's voice carried ice. "I'm sure a man of your caliber won't need more than a few days to prepare." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Philippe? I'll be bringing some colleagues from Lyon, native speakers who appreciate authentic cultural positioning." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a guillotine blade falling. Philippe's desperation had transformed him into something Jemima barely recognized. Through Lauren's careful reports and Tyler's increasingly concerned text messages, she watched her former boss unravel in real time. Gone was the smooth, arrogant executive who'd humiliated her in French just 2 weeks ago. In his place was a man making increasingly erratic decisions that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. "He tried to poach Sarah Chen from Morrison and Blake yesterday," Tyler told her over coffee at their usual spot near Central Park. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Offered her twice her current salary to join our creative team. When she turned him down, he actually called her boss to complain about unethical employee retention practices." Jemima stirred her cappuccino slowly, processing this information. Philippe's panic was accelerating faster than she'd anticipated. How did Robert react? "Anderson's starting to ask questions, real ones." Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Philippe promised Brittany Coleman a complete campaign overhaul in 72 hours. 72 hours, Jemima, for a luxury brand launch that should take months of development." The satisfaction she had expected to feel was complicated by something else. Concern. Not for Philippe, but for the collateral damage his desperation might cause. What about the other accounts? He's neglecting everything else. The Hartwell Group presentation got pushed back because Philippe was too busy trying to decode what went wrong with Maison Celeste. Jenny Morrison from Junior Creative actually came to me crying yesterday because he screamed at her for asking about the timeline for the restaurant chain pitch. Before Jemima could respond, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the text made her breath catch. "This is Nicole Carter, Philippe's wife. We need to talk. Today." Tyler noticed her expression immediately. "What is it?" "I'm not sure." She showed him the message, watching his eyebrows rise. "Nicole Carter, do you know her?" "Philippe's wife? I thought they were separated," Tyler frowned. "He never talks about personal stuff, but Lauren mentioned something about divorce proceedings a few months ago." Jemima's phone buzzed again. "I know what you're doing. I want to help. Coffee at Le Bernardine Bar, 4 p.m. I have information about his finances you'll find interesting." The message sent a chill through her. How much did Nicole know? And more importantly, what kind of information was she offering? "This is getting complicated," Tyler said, reading over her shoulder. "Jemima, maybe we should..." "Should what? Stop?" She looked at him sharply. "Philippe destroyed my career.
He humiliated me in front of our entire team, and based on what you're telling me, he's doing the same thing to other people now. I know, but Tyler ran a hand through his dark hair. His wife contacting you directly. That's not just professional revenge anymore. That's personal destruction. The weight of his words settled between them. Jemima had been so focused on exposing Philippe's professional incompetence that she hadn't fully considered the collateral damage that might follow. But as she thought about Jenny Morrison crying over Philippe's cruelty, about the chaos he was creating in his desperation, her resolve hardened. He made it personal when he fired me in French, when he assumed I was too stupid to understand him calling me worthless. Tyler reached across the table, covering her hand. Just be careful. People like Philippe don't go down quietly. And if his wife is reaching out to you, there might be more going on than just a bad marriage. At exactly 4 p.m., Jemima walked into Le Bernardin's elegant bar to find a striking woman in her early 40s waiting at a corner table. Nicole Carter had Philippe's same taste for expensive clothes, but where his style screamed status, hers whispered confidence. "Thank you for coming," Nicole said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm curious," Jemima admitted, settling into her seat. "How do you know what I'm doing?"
Nicole's smile was sharp and knowing. Philippe talks in his sleep, always has, and when he's stressed, she shrugged elegantly. He becomes very chatty about his theories regarding corporate sabotage and disloyal former employees. The pieces clicked into place. He knows someone is working against him. He suspects, but he's too arrogant to consider that his former assistant might be fluent in French. Nicole's eyes glittered with something that looked like satisfaction. That particular blind spot is going to cost him everything. Philippe's hands trembled slightly as he clicked to the next slide, sweat beading at his hairline despite the conference room's Arctic air conditioning. The Maison Celeste team sat around the polished table like a tribunal. Brittany Coleman at the head, flanked by her creative director and brand manager, their expressions professionally neutral but unmistakably skeptical. "As you can see," Philippe said, his accent thicker than usual, "we've completely reimagined the campaign aesthetic to better reflect Maison Celeste's sophisticated European heritage." The slides displayed a desperate pastiche of elements, borrowed heavily from campaigns Jemima had developed over the past year, but stripped of their cultural nuance and strategic foundation. Colors clashed where they should have complemented. Copy that had once sung with authentic French elegance now felt forced and artificial. Brittany leaned forward, her expression unchanged. "Philippe, I'm curious about this tagline, L'élégance authentique pour la femme moderne. Could you explain the strategic thinking behind it?" Philippe's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, it speaks to the authentic elegance that modern women seek. Mais bien sûr, mais qu'est-ce qui rend cette approche différente de nos campagnes précédentes? Et comment cette stratégie s'aligne, elle, avec notre expansion vers le marché asiatique? But what makes this approach different from our previous campaigns? And how does this strategy align with our expansion into the Asian market?" Philippe's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, then attempted a response in halting French that made Brittany's eyebrows rise almost imperceptibly. His explanation was stilted, confused, clearly the words of someone desperately trying to navigate a conversation beyond his capabilities. "I'm sorry," he said, switching back to English with obvious relief. "Could we continue in English? I want to make sure everyone understands the strategic implications." That's when the conference room door opened. Jemima walked in with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She wore her navy Armani suit, the one she'd been saving for special occasions, and carried herself with a dignity that made everyone in the room look up. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, her voice calm and clear, "but I believe there may be some confusion about the campaign strategy." Philippe's jaw dropped. "Jemima? You can't be here. Security."
Actually, Brittany interjected smoothly, I invited her as a consultant. The blood drained from Philippe's face as the implications hit him, but Jemima was already moving to the presentation screen, clicking back through the slides with practiced ease. The tagline Philippe presented contains a subtle but significant error. She began switching effortlessly to French. The phrase suggests elegance as a product rather than an experience. For Maison Celeste's Asian expansion, we need messaging that emphasizes aspiration and accessibility without compromising exclusivity. She spoke with fluid precision, her French accent carrying traces of her grandmother's Lyon heritage. Every word was perfectly pronounced, every cultural reference exactly appropriate. Philippe stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed world collapse as Jemima systematically corrected every error, filled every gap, and demonstrated the deep cultural understanding he'd never possessed. Furthermore, she continued, the color palette Philippe selected conflicts with Maison Celeste's brand architecture in 3 specific ways. As she spoke, Robert Anderson leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization. 2 years of successful campaigns, 2 years of Philippe taking credit for work that had clearly come from somewhere else, someone he'd just fired in a fit of arrogant rage. The room fell silent as Jemima finished her analysis. Philippe's mouth worked soundlessly, his face cycling through shock, rage, and finally devastating comprehension. He'd been outplayed by someone he dismissed as worthless, in front of his most important client, in the language he'd used to humiliate her. The aftermath came swift and merciless. Within 24 hours of the Maison Celeste presentation disaster, Robert Anderson had initiated a comprehensive review of Philippe's tenure at Sterling & Associates. What began as damage control quickly evolved into something far more damaging, a systematic excavation of 2 years' worth of professional misconduct. Jemima sat in her temporary office space, a corner table at the Gramercy Park Hotel's business center, watching the implosion unfold through carefully worded text from Tyler and occasional calls from Lauren Hayes, who had transformed overnight from cautious ally to key witness. The investigation isn't just about you anymore, Lauren said during their Tuesday morning coffee meeting, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and residual fear. Anderson brought in external HR consultants. They're interviewing everyone who's worked under Philippe in the past 3 years. Jemima stirred her latte absently, processing the scope of what she'd unleashed. And people are talking?
Everyone's talking. Lauren's laugh held no humor. It's like a dam burst. Jenny Morrison told them about the screaming incident last week. Marcus from account management detailed how Philippe took credit for his entire strategy presentation to Hartwell Group. Sarah Chen from Morrison and Blake even came in voluntarily to discuss Philippe's bizarre job offer and his subsequent harassment of her current employer. The weight of collective testimony painted a picture far darker than Jemima had initially understood. Her personal revenge had revealed a pattern of systematic abuse that had been festering for years, enabled by Philippe's ability to charm senior management while terrorizing subordinates. There's more, Lauren continued, lowering her voice. Nicole Carter provided financial documents showing Philippe's been padding his expense accounts, dinner receipts for client meetings that were actually personal dates, travel expenses for family vacations charged to company accounts as business development. Anderson is furious. Jemima felt a complex knot of emotions tightening in her chest. The scale of Philippe's misconduct should have been satisfying, vindication that her revenge was justified, proof that he deserved everything coming to him. Instead, she felt oddly hollow. The elaborate psychological chess game she'd orchestrated had revealed something uglier and more pervasive than she'd bargained for. Her phone buzzed with Tyler's name. "Can you meet tonight? We need to talk." They met at the small Italian restaurant where they'd shared countless lunches during their Sterling and Associates days. But the familiar setting felt strange now. Tyler looked tired, older somehow, as if the past week had aged him in ways that went beyond simple workplace stress. "They fired him this morning," he said, without preamble, sliding into the booth across from her. Security walked him out at 11:30. His access cards, company phone, everything. Gone. "How do you feel about that?"
Jemima asked, studying his face carefully. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, turning his wine glass slowly between his fingers. Honestly, relieved, but also he looked up at her. Jemima, what we did, what you did, it was necessary. Philippe was destroying people. But I keep thinking about whether there was another way. Another way? The question came out sharper than she had intended. I tried the normal channels, Tyler. HR complaints that went nowhere because Philippe was their golden boy, direct conversations with Anderson that got dismissed as personality conflicts. What other way was there? I know, I do. It's just, Tyler ran his hair through his hair. Watching him walk out today, seeing how broken he looked, for a minute, I almost felt sorry for him. The confession hung between them, and Jemima felt something shift in her chest. She'd expected to feel triumphant when this moment came. She'd imagined Philippe's defeat would taste like sweet vindication, would heal the wounds his cruelty had carved into her professional confidence. Instead, she felt empty in a way that she hadn't anticipated. "Do you think I went too far?" she asked quietly. Tyler reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I think you did what you had to do to protect yourself and other people he would have hurt. But Jemima," his eyes searched her face, "are you okay? Really okay? Because revenge doesn't always heal the things we think it will." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on orchestrating Philippe's downfall that she hadn't stopped to examine what she actually wanted from it. Justice? Vindication? Professional rehabilitation? Or had it simply been about making him feel as small and worthless as he'd made her feel? "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I'd feel different, satisfied, maybe. Instead, I just feel tired." "That's because you're not cruel like he was," Tyler said gently. "Cruel people enjoy watching others suffer. Good people do what's necessary and then feel the weight of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar sounds of the restaurant filling the space between them. Finally, Jemima spoke. "Anderson called this morning. He wants to meet tomorrow to discuss opportunities for collaboration. I think he's going to offer me Philippe's position." Tyler's eyes widened. "That's incredible! That's everything you wanted, right?" "Is it?" Jemima shook her head slowly. 6 months ago, yes. Philippe's corner office, his salary, his authority, that felt like justice. Now, she trailed off, trying to articulate the shifting landscape of her ambitions. "Now I'm not sure I want to succeed him so much as I want to succeed despite him." "What does that mean?" Jemima smiled for the first time in days, feeling something loosen in her chest. Maybe the best revenge isn't taking his place. Maybe it's building something better. The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on ethics and justice, on the difference between revenge and accountability. By the time they parted ways, Jemima felt something she hadn't experienced since that awful day in Conference Room B. Genuine excitement about her professional future. Philippe Moreau was gone, but the story was far from over. 6 months later, Jemima stood in the sleek lobby of her own consulting firm, watching the morning sun stream through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Hudson River. The space was smaller than Philippe's former corner office, but it was hers. Every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every strategic splash of color, every detail that spoke to authentic cultural understanding rather than borrowed sophistication. Dubois Cultural Marketing read the elegant lettering on the frosted glass doors, and beneath it, in smaller script, "Authentic Voice, Global Reach."
Her assistant, Maria, appeared with coffee and the morning schedule. Brittany Coleman's team will be here at 10 for the Maison Celeste expansion meeting. The Harper's Bazaar interview is at 2, and Tyler Rodriguez asked if you could push your dinner to 7:30. Jemima smiled, accepting the perfectly prepared café au lait, a small luxury that felt like a daily celebration of the cultural identity she no longer hid. Did he say why? Something about a surprise. Maria's eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. Should I tell him yes? Tell him yes. As Maria disappeared back to her desk, Jemima walked to her office window, looking down at the street below, where New Yorkers hurried through their morning routines. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, not just professionally, but fundamentally. The careful mask of neutral professionalism had been replaced by something more authentic, more powerful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren Hayes. "Saw the Forbes article about your firm. So proud. Coffee next week?" The Forbes piece had been unexpected, a feature on emerging businesses founded by women of color, highlighting how her bilingual expertise and cultural insight were reshaping luxury brand marketing. 3 major fashion houses had reached out since publication, and her calendar was booked solid through the end of the year. At exactly 10 o'clock, Brittany Coleman swept into the conference room with her characteristic energy, followed by her expanded international team. The friendship that had once been Jemima's secret weapon was now in open celebration, 2 successful women building something extraordinary together. The Tokyo launch exceeded projections by 40%, Brittany announced, settling into her chair with a satisfied smile. "Your cultural positioning strategy was perfect. We need to discuss Hong Kong, Seoul, and possibly Mumbai." As they worked through expansion strategies, Jemima felt the deep satisfaction of work that mattered, not just profitable, but meaningful. Every campaign she developed now carried the weight of authentic cultural understanding, the kind of insight that only came from living between worlds rather than appropriating them. The Harper's Bazaar interview went smoothly, the journalist clearly fascinated by the story of professional revenge that had become professional renaissance. But Jemima found herself steering the conversation away from Philippe's downfall towards something more important, the power of embracing, rather than hiding, one's cultural identity in professional settings. "The narrative that we have to choose between authenticity and success is false," she told the reporter. "My French heritage wasn't a liability to overcome, it was an asset to develop. The real failure was in workplaces that made people feel they had to hide who they were to succeed." As evening approached, Jemima found herself back at the Italian restaurant where she and Tyler had their crucial conversation months earlier, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than contemplative. Tyler arrived carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression she'd never seen before, nervous excitement mixed with determination. "Before you ask about the champagne," he said, sliding into their usual booth, "I have news. Anderson offered me Philippe's old position officially. Creative director, full authority over the team, complete restructuring mandate." "Tyler, that's wonderful!" Jemima felt genuine happiness for him, unmarred by any lingering professional jealousy. "You'll be amazing." "I accepted on one condition." He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "That Sterling and Associates' first major contract under my leadership would be a partnership with Dubois Cultural Marketing. Joint ventures, shared expertise, the works." Jemima stared at him, understanding dawning. "Tyler, I know it's mixing business with personal feelings," he continued, his words coming faster now. "But Jemima, what we built together, the trust, the shared values, the way we complement each other professionally, that's not something I want to lose, whether it's business partnership, personal partnership, or both." The champagne sat unopened between them as Jemima processed his words. 6 months ago, she'd been plotting revenge against a man who'd tried to destroy her career. Now, she was looking at a future that held not just professional success, but the possibility of love built on mutual respect and shared values. "Both," she said simply, and Tyler's smile could have powered the entire restaurant. As they finally opened the champagne, Jemima realized that the best revenge against Philippe Moreau hadn't been his downfall. It had been her rise, not replacing him, but surpassing everything he'd ever represented.